do communion. All right. Last week, we talked about the Church of Laodicea, and the primary point being they were providing neither refreshment for the spiritually weary nor healing for the spiritually sick. It was totally ineffective and distasteful to the Lord. Kind of talked about it from the context of, I know it's more common to hear him talking about spiritual passion and, vitality, but that's, ultimately, contextually, that's probably not what it meant to the Church of Laodicea. The Church of Laodicea didn't see hot as good and cold as bad. They saw both of them as useful, which I know doesn't really fit with our sort of modern day metaphorical view of hot and cold. But the reality is that's probably what it meant to the Church of Laodicea. There's plenty of spiritual backing and Christian backing, biblical backing for your concerns about being spiritually hot, but that's not what I was talking about there. So they were just totally ineffective because they just weren't bringing anything of value. And I think got into a great conversation this week in my studies. We were talking about contextualization. Don't worry, I think I need edification for you there. But we were talking about. By the way, I was pretty stoked about you doing the pizza crust story because I think that they told that same story this morning at Willow Creek in Chicago,
probably
in front of 75,000 people.
Yeah.
Their offering guy also told the crust story. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Rick Warren will have you next week.
You work at a round table?
No doubt. He's just telling them about the weird guy he saw. Not admitting to actually eating. So, speaking of distasteful of the Lord, but the idea of contextualization, which is really understanding people through their own context. Missionaries do it, anthropologists do it. It's very common to contextualize people. One of the things in America we don't do a good job of necessarily is contextualizing ourselves. We don't take a long look. We have this idea, I don't remember from Laodicea last week, where he said, look, I want to give you real gold, but you've accepted fool's gold. You've accepted less than what is the truth. And a lot of times in America we accept what's less than the truth because we have confused church context with Christ. The idea that we miss out on the idea that church is just a methodology for worshiping Christ in the culture in which we exist. That's all church is. It is a methodology for worship, learning, fellowship. All those things are great, but they are just a methodology. It's not right or wrong. It's just a methodology. Christ in and of himself never changes and must be worshipped as who he is. And so we continue to settle for less. And it's hard for us sometimes when you have people say, well, that's all I can really give of my life, really. That's all I want to do. I don't want to be somebody who goes out and tells people about Jesus. I don't want to be somebody. Now you are contextualizing Christ through your concerns. You're saying, Jesus is like, what does Jesus tell you to do? He says, go ye therefore, right? He says, get out, share the good news, talk to people, share your faith, draw people in. And when we go, it doesn't really work for me, you're now saying, Jesus, that's not how it works. You're saying, Jesus, I think it's cool what you're doing, but you don't really get where I'm at. That's when we have it all backwards. And that's kind of how the church is a lot of times in America, is we have sort of taken what we know to be Christian and we have defined Jesus by that. And we have to be very careful. The church at Laodicea had done that. They had fallen for custom and had fallen out of who Christ was. And I run into it a lot. I work with a sort of I consider the Kingsmen a parachurch organization because we have Christians from all over the community in our football program. And it's amazing how often people sit there and say, no, it's okay that I do that. Well, no, I don't think it is. I think Jesus is pretty black and white on the topic. And we fall out of it. So most of the letters end with this basic same terminology. It says to the one who is victorious, right? The one who has resolve, the one who overcomes. We read that in all the 7 letters. I will give the right to sit with me on the throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And I'm going to skip these next couple because I know that we kind of been doing other stuff. When you look at John 14, a lot of this got me thinking about John 14. John 14 is a really interesting discussion for kind of where a lot of us are at. And I appreciate the disciples taking care of it for us. Jesus is kind of in the middle of a conversation, and he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you?" So Jesus is saying, listen, you have to trust what I say is the truth. I'm going to take care of it. In my Father's house are many rooms. Heaven is being prepared for you. And then he says, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be with where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Interesting how Jesus says it. You know the place where I'm going. We run into this a lot as teachers, leaders, I'm sure parents, right? There's an assumption of, you get this, right? We're past this point. It's one of the things we say all the time, right? We should be past this point with our kids, right? You should get it by now, right? You shouldn't be, 18 and still potty trained. You should be past this point, right? We should be beyond this, right? We get to that point as coaches, we get to the point as leaders, where we just start looking at people and going, well, you get it, right? You understand it, right? So Jesus says, you know where I'm going. You know that place I'm going. With an assumption that people will be able to say, oh, yeah, I got it, I know totally where Jesus is going. And so he just says, you know the place where I'm going. And he says it matter-of-factly. So he has this idea that he understands the vastness of heaven is hidden. It's hidden beyond our view. Contemplating eternity is always a really cool exercise in futility. Because if it doesn't hurt your head, then you're not really trying very hard. Eternity really messes with your dome. It does. You start thinking, all of a sudden you're like, because we assume, okay, well, what's next phase, right? The beginning of eternity is just A, then there's an end to eternity, and then we start B. And we have this idea that somehow eternity is kind of, it's beyond our comprehension. But Jesus is going to come back and take the faithful with him to paradise. And then he says, you know the way. How many of us know the way? Right. He says, you know the way. Very simple formula. He says, you know the way. I've been teaching you for years. Can I just assume you know something? That's kind of how Jesus is approaching this. Let's talk first about what you know. You ever go back to that square? Let's go back to, what is it you know at all? Anything? Okay, let's start over. Let's go back to square one. Can I assume you know something? And then this beauty is dropped. Oh, Thomas. Poor guy. Bad eternal wrath, this guy. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? I love Thomas. Right? That's a great question. Well, I don't know where you're going. And so we have Thomas, right? Every group needs a guy who doesn't believe in stupid questions. Every group needs that guy. Because how many times have we been going, you're such an idiot. Because we don't know the answer. And we're so glad that dude asked. Right? Is it just me? There's a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I totally know, Jesus, where we're going. Hey, where do we know? Hey, I don't know where you're going. Thomas doesn't know where you're going. Can you tell him? Because then what always happens, right, when you're the other guy?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you tell him? Well, I would, but I would be way more complicated than you, Jesus. Why don't you just tell him the simple way? Because I only know the really complicated way. Right? Because every group needs that guy, right? We roll our eyes, but there's a little part of us that secretly admires and appreciates them. Thomas was that guy. The disciples love that guy. He's like, can I see your scars? They're like, yeah. Thomas, total doubter. Right? They love this guy. But how do we know the way if we don't know the destination? Right? That's Thomas's question. And so we look at it and we think, how would Thomas be so dense still at this point to not know? How would Thomas not have any idea? Well, if you look at the Old Testament, you got to remember, life for Thomas, heaven was still a new concept. Because he grew up in the era of Sheol, right? The dominating understanding of death was that we went to a place of shadows. So for Thomas, he's still embracing this whole idea of what the destination really was. It was a little different for him. And we could sit there and say, oh, but man, come on, he's walking with Jesus for years. How is that still a struggle? Well, how many of you guys are still struggling with your initial context? How many of you guys are still struggling with the way you were raised and trying to undo it? Probably nobody in this room, because we've worked very hard to counsel everyone through it. But how many of us still sit there and struggle with certain things simply because we were raised a certain way? How many of us were raised that, in church, you don't go into church and be, goofy. You go and you be reverent. Right? Because that's what Jesus wanted. Because he was totally reverent every time he went to church, except for the time he kicked the tables over and whipped that guy. Right? How many of us were taught to be reverent in church? How many of us still struggle with being reverent in church? Right? I've told the story a few times, but I read that the number one place of regression in professional men is in church. That men who are professional in the outside world that are very, just men, this is not a sexist thing, the study was done on men, but that men come into church and act more immature than they do anywhere else in their life. Tell the goofier stories, tell the jokes they shouldn't tell, which does not happen here. I'm proud of all of you men for progressing in church. But the idea that we have to undo our context sometimes. And it's amazing how much of a fight we have with our churchianity instead of our Christianity. We have a huge fight with context, especially, you gotta remember, for Thomas, he's fighting this. Because to him, it was a place of shadows. And if somebody tells you, I'm going to prepare a place, where? Out there. There's a struggle here. So Thomas asks a very good question. If our destination is not a factor, the paths we choose or path we choose are all going to be correct. That's a reality. If we don't know where we are going, if we don't have an understanding of destination, then any path you choose is correct. Do you guys understand that? We talk about spiritual relativism all the time. It's a very common topic in today's world. So the question is, if you are not aiming at Jesus, if you are not aiming at heaven, then any path you choose is the correct one, correct? You can do whatever you want if you don't have a destination in mind, if you don't have an understanding of what the long-term impact of your life choices are. We live in an era now where everybody can do whatever everybody wants to do and it's supposed to be okay. We live in an era where in our churches we tell people you can do whatever you want to do and it's okay. Because we don't have an understanding of destination. We don't have an understanding of process. For Thomas, he asked a very good question. How am I supposed to know how to get there if I don't know where I'm going and I don't know the way? You can, if you don't know where Oakdale, California is, okay, which that's probably cool. If you don't know where Oakdale, California is, you can get on Highway 99 with all the intention in the world of getting to Oakdale, California, and it will not get you there. Right? It will not, no matter how much you really want to get to Oakdale. Because we all want to get to Oakdale. Right? They have the almond tree there. Right? We want to get to Oakdale. But no matter how many times you drive up and down Highway 99 with all the intentions of the world of getting to Oakdale, you will never get to Oakdale. Because you're not following the right path. Thomas asked a really good question. How are we supposed to know the way? If I don't know where I'm going, and you didn't tell me. And that's what Jesus is like. I know you're still trying to overcome what you've been taught about the sort of intermediate state between life and ultimately eternity. If we're all running a race without a clear finish line, we're all winners. And there's nothing I like more than everybody being a winner. I'm a big participation trophy guy. I think everybody should get one. And it's because it's the best. And it makes me feel good to give them out. Right? You tried. You did your best. You did your best. What's the score? You lost. But we're running a race without a clear finish line. If we are not aiming at Jesus, if we're not aiming at heaven, we're running a race without a clear finish line. And if we do that, then everybody can decide they've won no matter which direction they go or how it happens. And one of the problems we have is in the church, we've become so sort of relativistic, we've become so accepting, we've become so splendidly, wonderfully, embracingly tolerant that we have missed the point of heaven is a singular place that you can get to through a singular entity. That it is a one direction, one destination type thing. And that's what Jesus is talking about when he responds. That's what's different about Christians is we know the way, and we should be focused on our destination. As Christians, we should actually be focused on our destination. We should be running the race with the goal in mind. And not just a goal, right? Anybody ever have one of those days? What's your plan today? I don't know, but I'm going to get something done. Chances are you're not going to get anything done, right? Except catching up on all those reruns of Castle. Jesus answers and he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So Jesus makes his response to Thomas very clear. He says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Right? I'm all you need. Thomas, I understand where you're coming from, buddy. It's a hard question. I appreciate you stepping up because I can see Peter had a question on his face too, but I can see you're listening. And I appreciate you. He says, I am all you need. I'm it. No one will find the Father in the end but through Jesus. He says, you will not find the Father. Now that you have seen me, now that you know me, you know God. In the eyes and the life of Jesus, we see all we need to see about eternity. As Christians, sometimes we do our best to hope, and boy, sure, of course. The reality is it's singular of destination, singular of path. So, now that all that's been sorted out, right, the disciples, everybody's on the same page. Everybody's feeling really, really good. If you've read ahead, you know there's a little turn here. But then Philip steps up, not to be outdone by Thomas. Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough. That makes what Thomas said sound way better. Thomas is like, thank you, Philip. Yeah, dude. Because, I mean, I understand as being translated through, to a different language. This sure comes off sounding kind of smug. Right? Philip's like, sure, you're Jesus. You're the Messiah. You've done all these amazing things. We've seen you walk on water. We've seen you heal. We've seen you do all these things. All awesome. This is amazing. But if you just show us, show us God the Father. Just, give us one of those, Monty Python-esque opening of heaven. God looking down, the Father looking at me. Then we're good. Then we're clear. We got this handled. That'll be enough. That'll be enough. And that's one of those moments where you just, massive, amazing spiritual restraint on Jesus' part in his response. But basically saying, look, show us what it all looks like, and then we'll have all we need. You expose to me every mystery, and I guarantee you, Jesus, I will never have a problem with what you're saying. That's all you need to do, right? All you need to do is expose heaven. And Jesus is like, have you not been paying attention? I mean, Thomas's question at least had some context. But you got to remember, Philip has the same problem. Philip is dealing with an upbringing, an understanding, the concern. He's struggling with the difficulties of the messenger in this case. He says, if you hide it from us, how will we ever know that it's true? If you keep hidden God the Father, all you got to do is open the heavens, let me see his face, and then that will be enough. We're covered, Jesus. The contract is fulfilled. And Jesus responds to Philip in a rather more frustrating manner. I think he's a little bit more kind, obviously, to Thomas. But he says, don't you know me? That's pretty much something you never want Jesus to say to you. Right? Do you have any idea? Not a good start to your conversation. He says, don't you even know me? Philip, after I have been among you for such a long time, after I've been with you for this long, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Now, as a father, this is the part of the discussion where my voice goes up a little. Right? When you say something like, how can you say, right? Every dad in the room, usually it's followed with, how can you say I don't love you? Right? Or whatever. But the reality is, this is where he starts to raise his voice, and at least as far as how I would communicate. He says, don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? Because really he's been saying that all along. Don't you understand the dynamics of our relationship? I've been very clear since day one. The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. He has constantly given authority to God the Father. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. And he says, believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. So at this point, Jesus listening to Philip go, hey, you know what? You've done some awesome work. Don't get me wrong, it's very good stuff. But if you could just show us God the Father, then that'll be enough. Jesus is like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Have you not paid attention to the landscape of what you've been watching for the last couple of years? Have you not been paying attention? Are you crazy? And we sit there, and we do it all the time, though. I know so many Christians who every time something goes wrong, hands up in the air, Jesus hates me. Well, weren't you telling me about a time Jesus brought you through something a few weeks ago? Oh, yeah, but he hates me now. But haven't you've been a Christian a long time, right? There's a lot of good stuff. Well, yeah, but he hates me now. And that's all I need to know. And it's like, okay, so as long as everything turns up daisies in your life, you're okay. Right? Roses. Daisies makes you day. Roses. Right? Turning up daisies, then I guess it's all settled. The idea is that everything's turning up fantastic, right? And it's like, then all of a sudden we're like, Jesus is cool. But the minute it gets tough, the minute we have to rely on faith, we go, Jesus, why have you abandoned me? And we want that visual evidence. We want Jesus to stand right there in front of us and just tell us what's going on. Because if not, then I can't believe. Because if not, it doesn't work. And so he says to Philip, he says, man, where have you been? Haven't you been with me? Where have you been? Where have you been in your Christian life? Every time you start to get frustrated and struggle and start to doubt, where have you been all along? It's amazing how quickly we abandon things. Haven't you seen what I've done? Haven't you seen all the blessings you have in your life? The reason we talked about happiness stuff earlier is because, man, we've all been given great things. Yeah, man, we're all going to suffer tragedy. Right? Very few of us are walking out of this puppy alive. Maybe all of us. The Bible says we don't know when. But he says, how can you still doubt after all we've been through? How can you still doubt after all we've been through? Isn't that one of the hardest things when people do to you? When you've done nothing but give and respect and care for them? And then all of a sudden they start to doubt your motives, your intentions. You're like, how can you say that after everything we've done? That hurts, doesn't it? And that's what Philip's doing. He says, I am the Father, and the Father is in me. Our destination is together forever. One of the things is, in taking the combination of the parallel here, is that with Thomas and Philip, we have Christian struggle. We have Christian struggle that we can all identify with in this case. This is how it relates to us. One thing not to forget is that Thomas and Philip both gave their lives to serve Christ. We can sit there and talk about Peter's mistakes and his denials. We can talk about Thomas and his audacious questions that none of us would have ever asked. We can talk about Philip. We can talk about, James and the discussion about who's the most loved, and we can point out their mistakes. But we have to remember this group of men gave their lives every day to follow Christ, all over the place, right? Sleeping on rocks, sleeping out in the woods, sleeping out in the desert. Getting a cool show almost probably every afternoon there for a while, so that's pretty awesome. But dealing with some of those things, they both walked and they were discipled by Christ. He spent time with him. But Thomas ultimately was unsure about the message. Thomas struggled with the message because he was dealing with a context that didn't line up with the message. Peter deals with that as well in another passage, right? When Jesus says, I have to die. And what does Peter say? No, you don't. No, you don't. And Jesus calls him Satan. So it works out good. Thomas was unsure about the message, right? He was struggling with the message. He was struggling with the completeness of the message, which is a very core piece of a lot of Christian struggles, that we struggle with the message. Philip was unsure about the messenger. Doesn't mean that he doubted who Christ was as a friend, who Christ was as a rabbi, but Philip had yet to really understand who Christ was as God, because that relationship hadn't reached that point yet, and he was still getting there. But these two men, one unsure about the message because it didn't line up with how he thought it should go, and we see that a lot, especially in our country now, as people just decide that the message of the gospel doesn't line up with how they feel God should be, so they're not going to listen because God would be totally different if they made him, right? So we start looking at that first group, right? How many of us are unsure about the message? No, don't raise your hand. But a lot of us struggle with the message. We struggle with the right path because we're still unsure about the destination. We struggle with the completeness of the message. Many of us, we would never come out and say it, but there are times in our lives where we struggle like Thomas with the message. Now, a lot of us maybe don't have the guts to ask because we've been in church our whole lives and we should know better, right? Because that totally is what makes the difference, is how long you've been in church. But we struggle with the message. We struggle with the complexities of the message. We struggle with, sometimes the message seems a little intolerant, and we prefer a very tolerant message. We struggle with the message of Jesus, but Jesus says that he is the only way. Regardless of what you're told by other people, Jesus says, I am the way. He doesn't say I'm one of them. He doesn't say I'm an option. He doesn't say if you can't find a better way, you always go through Jesus, right? He doesn't ever say that. He says, I am way. I am the way. That's it. Done. Nobody else. I don't care what you think, what you say. The reality is, that is the message. And for Thomas, he had to overcome some of that context he had been raised with. He had been raised to think a little differently. He had been raised to understand heaven a little differently. And man, I'll tell you, one of the hardest things for me, as somebody who has been, for the most part, a Christian since my youth, a few rough years there in the middle, but since my youth, for the most part, I have been educated. I've gone through theology, I've gone through all that. One of the most amazing things is as I get older, I still struggle with some of that stuff, and it comes up. And, to the point where in my class this week, I was arguing with one of the students, because he was frustrated that I was frustrated. And I said, but you don't get it. You're just a missionary. And, I respect missionaries. But the idea of understanding context and me saying, my struggle is dealing with this. My struggle is when you start being more concerned about who's hearing it than what's being said, that struggles. But the more I think about it, the more I think, that's stuff from my youth. Stuff that I was taught in a hermeneutics class in 1995, where I was taught that you spend 1 hour of preparation for every minute of your sermon. Because it is that important that you get it right. Because if you get it wrong, you're going to screw up somebody's life. The reality is that Jesus says it's that simple. The message can be difficult. The message can be rather intolerant at times. But there is no other way but through Jesus. That is the completeness of the message. That is the heart of the message. And how, I always tell people, trust God with the afterlife. You might have some questions, but just trust that the room's going to be pretty sweet. But there's no other way but through Jesus to get there. And if we don't keep our eye on the ultimate destination, then we will lose the way. It's amazing how if you can see the prize, it's amazing how if you see the finish line, you don't need directions. Right? It's amazing how hard it is to find it when you take your eyes off of it. I grew up deer hunting with my dad all the time, and I love deer hunting. Okay? But one of the coolest things about deer is if you see it, you go, there it is. Then you raise your rifle up, you look through the scope and go, uh-oh.
Where'd you go? Yeah.
Because you took your eye off it for a second. And it's amazing how quickly it disappears. And how many of us in our faith, we take our eyes off Jesus, we take our eyes off heaven, we take our eyes off eternity. We take our eyes off the ultimate goal, which is to disciple and teach people about Jesus and grow the kingdom. But we take our eyes off it and we put it on our junk. Take our eyes off it and we put it on the garbage we've piled up. We take our eyes off it and we put it on other things that are going on in our lives. We take our eyes off it and we become consumed with these other issues. Man, I'm telling you right now, a distracted church is a disaster for the kingdom of heaven. We become more focused about our differences. We become more focused about what my context matters, what my context doesn't matter. We take our eyes off the fact that Jesus says, I am the only way, and that by virtue of me saying yes to Jesus, I am now enlisted in his group. I'm enlisted in his passion, his goals, his values, which is he went through everything to bring people to him. He went through everything to bring people to the doorstep of the Father. And man, I'm telling you, I don't know a lot of Christians that feel that way. Most of us are like, yeah, I love Jesus and he gets me through every day, but we don't do anything for him. We don't get out there and we're not passionate and active for him because I don't know that we've ever really bought into the message. I think a lot of us are hedging our bets. Right? Pascal's wager. I think a lot of the church is full of people because of Pascal. It's better to believe in God and be wrong than to not believe in God and be wrong. Right? That's the wager. And I think a lot of us are on that. A lot of us have wagered up on that baby. That's where our chips are sitting. And the reality is, man, that's not belief in the message. It's believing in the odds. And then we look at Philip and he says, how many of us struggle with the messenger? How many of us struggle with Jesus? How many of us struggle with the person of Jesus? How many of us feel the person of Jesus shouldn't be, it was so long ago. That's my favorite one, right? Why did God do it so long ago? Seems like it makes more sense now. Of course you think it should make more sense now. Because you're here. Maybe that's why he chose 2,000 years ago. I'll let that one permeate through. Jesus doesn't fit my mold, right? My Savior, white horse, flaming sword. Seems way cooler with a helmet like Patton. Right? That'd be sick. But when can I see the Father? I'll believe in you, Jesus, the minute you open heaven and show me the Father. Oh, you can't? Oh, then you're not real. Or you know what? You're a really good teacher, which is, my favorite, balancing act. But Jesus says that all you need to see is me. Jesus says all you need to see is me, because in seeing me, you see the Father. And that's where faith comes in. Faith matters. When we read those letters over the last 7 weeks in Revelation, it all came down to resolve. It all came down to everyone who has ears, let them hear. It all came down to, ultimately, the prize is yours only when and if you stick with it. Well, sticking with it's not hard if we don't, if we're not required to put anything into it. If we think Pascal's wager is sticking with it, good luck. That's not sticking with it. The church is called to focus on Christ and focus on heaven and live in accordance with what he teaches. We should be passionate people who love God. We should be people who are not afraid. We should be principled people. We should be people who stand up strong. We should be people who are out there constantly talking about Christ. We should be people who aren't afraid to speak our mind. One of the points of context, my concerns was that, we're trying so hard to make everything culturally relevant now that all we preach is we try to say love and tolerance, when I'm like, well, Jesus rebuked, he corrected, he brought up some serious points. He brought up some serious points of interest, and a few times he pushed away. The reality is we have to be people like him, not afraid. I had a guy yesterday tell me, how come all you Christian football organizations are the same? And I kind of laughed and I went, I don't know, all you secular organizations are the same. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know, tell me what yours is supposed to mean. We just both laughed and moved on. Well, I laughed. But to me, it's, sometimes I think we miss the point of being strong and really buying into the messenger. But, sometimes we've been taught this sort of, can't use that word, we've been taught this weak Jesus The American church, Jesus, is so pathetic sometimes. I just sit there and I listen and I go, that's it? Man, I so wouldn't go to church if that's what Jesus was. I wouldn't be in church if that's what Jesus really was. But man, we've been taught this sort of soft, churchianity that's about, getting saved and putting money in the offering every week, going to potlucks every month. And, Jesus is happy with you. We've been taught this idea, this contextual methodology of worshiping God that's so sad. That's so pathetic. And meanwhile, our churches are full of people that are still struggling with the message and don't even realize it, or they're struggling with the messenger and are afraid to accept it and be honest about it. Because we've taken that fool's gold, we've put it in our pocket, and we went, well, I'm good. But the reality is that fool's gold will get you nothing. No matter how much of it you have, you can have a dump truck full and it's getting you nothing. Which is a little bit of gold can change your life. And that's the thing, and I was just thinking about a way to wrap up the whole Revelation theory series, and I was thinking a lot about this passage where Jesus deals with, two guys that are struggling with where they're coming from. And maybe you're struggling with where you're coming from. Maybe you've been afraid to admit it. That you really don't know up from down, that you really are consistently chastising yourself for some churchianity thing. And Jesus is like, I've forgiven you, it's time to move on. Embrace me. We're good to go. I know the path, follow me. But we're sitting there going, man, I can't. Jesus, I got all this really, really quality luggage right here that the church told me I have to carry. And I'm exhausted. And what do we always do? Jesus, can you take my burden? Jesus is like, put it down. I don't want that garbage. That's the church, man. Put that down. Let's get rolling. So, that was the best way, I think, to wrap it up. So, in an awkward fashion, let's close. Father God, I thank you so much for this morning. I thank you so much for this group of people. I pray your blessing over our lives. I pray for those of us who are wrestling with either the message or the messenger that we can begin to share that, be honest with each other. Look for encouragement. Look for someone to help us with where we're coming up, short, where we're struggling. God, I pray for all that this morning. That's a great group of people, and I think a group of people that can be tremendous warriors, kingdom builders for you. God, when they really, really get the passion of who you are, and they begin to really get that momentum going in their lives about wanting to share the gospel, about wanting to disciple, about wanting to grow your kingdom. Because really that's when we've embraced both you and your message. It's when we begin to live by it. And not just show up to church every week, hoping to check the box. God, I thank you this morning for your challenging words. I thank you for your disciples that were so awesome and asked all the questions we had. So we could have a good, easy conversation. In your name. Amen. Amen. All right. Go do something constructive. I'm just kidding. It's Sunday. Do it tomorrow.